We're really excited today to have Dr. Alix Boyer and Dr. Dan Skinner joining us from their home, like everybody else is. They're an awesome duo. Aside from being, you're both chiropractors, is that right?
We are, yeah.
Yeah. So aside from being clever like that, they're also involved in a new company in Victoria called Third Space Movement, or Third Space, I guess, which is like I'm going to call it a movement studio, but I don't want to get that wrong. That sounds right.
Yeah, that's a good way to wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really unique space. I kind of feel bad for you guys because you just opened your doors and then this happened. So that's a tough position to be in. But it's a pretty dynamic group of people, and I have no doubt that you'll weather the storm here. And of course, they're jumping online to share their expertise with people, and so we feel really lucky to have them here today. And so I'll let you take it from there. And they want to leave some room for questions at the end, but I'm sure if along the way, if something sticks out and you're like, hey, can you just expand on that? We can jump in, and they'll probably do that too. So anyway, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Oh yeah,
Good morning.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So Alix and I are both chiropractors. I'll give you a little bit more background on ourselves. So my background was in cycling. I was a Cat 1 cyclist for about 10 years when I was bike racing before I went to chiropractic school. Alix was a competitive equestrian rider, so she was at a very high level too. She was at like junior Olympic level, and so we both, throughout our period of time as athletes, and then also now that we're in healthcare and we're dealing with athletes and we're dealing with people that are, everyone from the weekend warriors to the competitive athlete, we see that there's lots of stress management that needs to be done, lots of injury management that comes up along the way. And I think this will be a cool opportunity for us to pass on some of the stuff that we've picked up through our careers, and then also through our practice careers, to kind of give you guys a few nuggets here and there, and hopefully be able to figure out some good ways to make you guys be able to maintain yourselves through this quarantine. It's kind of a tough time because a lot of us rely on therapists to help us out with aches and pains and assessment and things like that. But now that we're all kind of confined to our homes, it's a little bit more difficult for us to be able to know exactly what we should do. So by the end of this, I'm hoping what we can offer you guys is a nice little kind of like almost like a body maintenance regime that you can all try, and to think of it as a generic way of doing it, but it's also a nice way to make sure that you're hitting all the little check boxes on parts of your body that are probably going to get a little beat up. Not only the fact that you're going to be home, but the fact that you're doing the swim, bike, run kind of thing. So we're going to target it towards people in your kind of demographic, if that makes sense. Does that sound good? Awesome. And then, like Jasper was saying too, we want this to be not just us talking the whole time. So if there is a question, or if you want some expansion on a point that one of us brings up, just like do the little wave or unmute your microphone.
Or use the chat feature.
Yeah, or you could. We have a chat feature on here too, so
we'll keep an eye on that.
Yeah, and then like Jasper was saying too, we did just open up a studio in town called Third Space Movement. And one of the reasons why we all wanted to do it, there's actually six different owners for it. We all kind of came together because we all saw this need for there to be like a unified like movement community around quality, around good coaching. Just one of those things that we kind of see as one of the deficits that's even now probably more highlighted, because we're not able to do one-on-one work anymore. We're not able to do like in-person classes where we can coach a person and talk about form and talk about execution and things. And so I think that what we're also seeing is a lot of people that are doing at-home workouts are kind of left to their own devices, and that can actually be kind of hard. That can end up beating up our bodies a little bit more than usual too. Like I'm sure everyone has just done probably more core and more push-ups and more burpees and more air squats than they've ever done in their entire life. And so it's good to have that enthusiasm, but it's also, I think that, well, when it comes to injuries, we can sustain different types. We can get a chronic, like a chronic stress injury, or we can get acute injuries. So an acute injury would be something like I roll my ankle when I'm out trail running. Versus a chronic injury might be something where if I'm beating my body up and I'm not allowing it that ample recovery time, I start to almost spend my body, and then to a point where I have a balance of zero. And maybe then I start to go into a deficit, and then I start to overdraft my account. And that's what we're probably going to start to see a little bit more and more as we get deeper into this quarantine, is the people that have not necessarily prepared themselves for all the body weight stuff and all the core stuff, and that are using that as their primary way of exercising, that they're going to start to notice that their spending account starts to drop down more and more. Jen Rudy just dropped in, right on. It's cool to see all the little names pop up and everything like that. So that's hopefully what we're going to be able to help you guys out with, is give you a little bit of like a routine, or a little bit of like a self-assessment tool that you guys can use at the end of this. And that's kind of our job as chiropractors too, is to make sure that people are maintaining their health and that they're not overspending their body. Do you have anything you want to throw in there, Ned?
I think you covered it all.
I'll just keep talking all the time. But I guess getting down to it, the biggest thing that ultimately leads to a person getting injured or overspending their body is when the load that they're putting on their body is exceeding their capacity. And so I'll give you an example. The best example I could think of would be like a runner who's increasing their mileage, and they're used to running 10K a day. And let's say they do 50K a week. And if they quickly oversee their capacity and start to run 20-kilometer days consistently, then the breakdown in the bones in their feet can start to kind of amplify. And then next thing you know, they've got a stress fracture. So if we take our load and we start to bring it up too quickly, then all of a sudden we now have this decreased ability to recover. And then eventually our body can kind of develop stress fractures or aches and pains and things like that. And a lot of what we get when it comes to feelings of stiffness and discomfort and pain are like warning signals that our body's starting to tell us. So we start to feel, all of a sudden we wake up like, oh, I don't feel so loose and limber. I start to feel maybe a little bit of tightness in my lower back, or I start to feel some soreness and aching in my feet or something. Those are all those telltale signs. And that's why I think that having a daily routine or some kind of daily check-in with your body not only gives you a chance to remedy some of that, but it also gives you an opportunity to recognize it, because sometimes we don't know we have a symptom until all of a sudden it's there and just yelling at us. So when we're looking at things that we can control, especially right now, the most important thing is making sure that we're not reaching too far out of our box. And a lot of us all of a sudden got confined to this small box that might be our apartment or our house. And then we're being forced to now all of a sudden make huge routine changes, huge schedule changes. And that is when you see the biggest jump in injury rate. That's when, all of a sudden the summer shows up, and then my office is filled with runners who now all of a sudden have shin splints and have heel problems and everything. It's because there was a big change, and all of a sudden they all went from running on the treadmill or from having relatively low mileage to all of a sudden high mileage, because it feels really good to get the wind in your face and the sun on your body. And when we can look at the things that we can control like this, is let's make sure that we're checking in with our coaches, like making sure that if you do have a program or a schedule, that, you guys are fortunate enough to work with some great coaches. And I think that just making sure that you're sticking with the program that you're given, that's like having a little bit of faith in what's going on, and the process, even though it's kind of new to all of us, is going to be super, super, super important. Because I can't tell you the amount of times where I've looked at my training programs in the past and been like, 2 hours, I'm just going to go ahead and double that. And I'll just finish with waterfront at the end there. It's like, it's so easy to ask your body to do more. And I was telling Jasper right before this that I was looking at one of his videos that he just posted where he was talking about recovery strategies. And I actually think that is the biggest, lowest hanging fruit that we have in performance sport, and probably in just recreational sport too, is managing our recovery. And one of the biggest things that I tell people about is this idea of minimum effective dose and then maximum recoverable volume. And so those two pieces are probably the most important when it comes to recovery, because the minimum effective dose is the bare minimum that you have to do in order to make some improvement. And then the maximum recoverable volume is just how much you can do before you start to hit diminishing returns. So it could be a 10 kilometer run. And by the time that you're done that, everything you're doing on top of that is just eating into any benefit you got from doing that initial exercise. And we do it all the time. And that's because that when our body's feeling good and we get these endorphins released and everything, we're tinkering with the way that our body looks at exercise, because some stress for us can be really good. But too much stress is always going to be too much, and it's going to start to kind of send us down that decline. That's why we have like recovery weeks, and that's why we have days off and everything. And as much as it sucks to all of a sudden have it be a sunny day out and you're like, oh, I would love to do more miles, but your coach has you scheduled for a recovery day, listen to your coach. Your coach is looking out for you. And sometimes having that extra set of eyes on you makes all the difference.
Yeah. I for sure couldn't go back and do the same volume of training that I used to do. I think we just know more now that overtraining wasn't a word 10 years ago, or at least it wasn't one that I really heard, or it wasn't used in the same context as it is now. And yeah, I think just what you said.
Yeah. And it's so much more of a problem of under recovering.
Mm-hmm.
And, because it's easier to get out there and throw another 5K on your run than it is to take a nap, because we look to the active stuff that we can do. And Alix comes from a really interesting sport background too, where, it's not just her that she's having to manage. She's also dealing with a horse, and animals have their own, they express symptoms and things like that in a completely different way too. And hearing some of the horror stories about how they would train and how they would practice and everything like that sounds very like, I don't know, there's some old school mentality that still sticks around.
There's a cult mentality for sure.
Yeah.
It's all you do.
Yeah.
It's all you do.
Totally. And so just to wrap a little bow around that too, do you have a question there, Balmer?
Yeah, I got a question. Just totally off topic, but do horses do they run on a similar program that?
They do, yeah. So horses typically are 6 days on, 1 day off, usually. If it's like a higher intensity, sometimes they'll get 2 days off, but that's varies trainer to trainer and owner to owner and horse to horse. But like even when my workout's done, I still have to take care of the horse, and that's still work that I have to do. So like you have your own schedule, but basically you follow a horse's schedule and you keep up with it. That's sort of the way it is. It's not so much about training a rider. It's more about training the horse, and then you keep up. you have to do sort of like, so you would have your horse generally like one rider, one horse that you would compete with, but the way that you would stay in shape would be volunteering to ride other people's horses for just more miles and more time in the saddle. And so my time used to consist of like not just my training ride with my horse, but riding my friends' horses, riding the trainer's other horses, riding just anything that you could get time with. And that's like would really build up your muscle. So it wouldn't be normal for me to just go out and ride my horse. I would be like 3 to 4 horses a day type of thing. So that's
they take recovery weeks too.
They didn't have recovery weeks. No, that would, certain disciplines would do that, or after like a really big, after a really big competition or something, they might get a couple of weeks off and then go right back into the next circuit. But that's more for like the higher impact sports like jumping and stuff. So they might have that after a really big thing that they were training for, but for the most part, it's year round.
It would be so interesting to see like a periodized training schedule for a horse. I've never learned so much about horseback riding than dating Alix, and it was so interesting to me because it's just like it's such a weird sport, because I actually came from that mindset where I was like, horseback riding in the Olympics, like, and then I see just how much actually goes into it, and you're just like, whoa, that is legitimately a sport.
Full contact sometimes.
Yeah, and to see how like what it does to your body too afterwards. And that's like a good point that Alix brought up, this idea that like we often just jump, like, pardon the pun, right back in the saddle after we've taken some time off, and we get right back into whatever our exercise routine was. And so I can't count the amount of times where I've had a person show up in my office and they're like, you know what, I felt like I was getting out of shape. They're in like their mid 30s or 40s or 50s or whatever. And they're like, so I decided I'd just get right back into the gym and I started hitting my own training program, you know, the one that I did when I was 20, and, you know, nothing hurt. My body was like, they just get right back into what they thought was their old normal. And that's the point where their body isn't prepared for what they're giving it. Right. And then they start to like eat into that body deficit. And so one of the big things that we can use to not only prepare ourselves is like, aside from like a good assessment, like an everyday assessment, is also just making sure that we're taking care. Like, I think of it as just the same way that Alix takes care of her horses after she rides them. Or another analogy I use is like a sushi chef takes pride and care in their knives. You guys should be taking care of your bodies in that way too. You should be thinking of it as like your legs and your arms and your lungs and everything are like your bread and butter. And you want to make sure that we're not just using and abusing them. We're actually like taking the time to make sure that we're cleaning them and taking care of them and everything like that too. So we'll show you guys a few little myofascial techniques, and you know, it's going to be, a lot of it will be review for some people, but a lot of it is also going to be new in the way that you're looking at it, and we're kind of changing the application on it, because foam rollers can only be done so many ways, and lacrosse balls can only go into so many places. But a lot of it has to do with the mindset and also the techniques that you're using when you do all that kind of stuff. Does that kind of make sense? Sweet. Any other questions? That was a great question, by the way. Okay, cool.
I did like, I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole, but I do have a question at the end. I'll save it for the end, just so that I feel like it's a rabbit hole that would take an hour. So
Now,
I'll save it for the
I'm
end.
curious. I have to know
you know
now.
what? Now I'm so curious. I can't wait.
It's nothing. It's actually not that big a question. I'm just fascinated with the horse stuff, where they're obviously on a stress load and recovery management program as well. And my question, again, answered at the end, because I think it's more important we get to the myofascial stuff and the stuff you're going to do. But it's more just around, it sounds like the horses are doing less than what you were trying to do, because you're trying to ride everybody else's horse.
Mm-hmm.
And my question was, is that because the impact load for the horse is way higher? Like they're basically doing plyometrics, jumping, running, like it's very high impact. Whereas as the rider, I know it's probably very strenuous, but it's a little different. Don't answer it. Let's save it for the end. I just found that so
I want to
fascinating.
answer it so bad.
Yeah. Okay.
I could do it kind of quick.
Do it.
Okay.
Okay. Well.
Okay, I won't.
To be
Save it for the end, because I think the most beneficial thing for the group on here is going to be like whatever techniques you're going to show us for recovery with rollers, whatever you're going to do, I think is great. And if people have to go, then they can go. And if they want to stick around and hear how horses train, they can.
Not unlike humans, though. That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're just going to show you guys what we think are probably the most important things for people who are in multi-sport to be working on. The number one thing that I get almost every runner to work on is just a little bit of self-myofascial release on their feet and in the back of their calves. And that's, I think probably a lot of people would have an easy time understanding why that is. And it's because we're spending lots of time on our feet running. We're spending lots of time with our carbon fiber sole shoes on, where it's just this rigid piece of material, which is like, I don't know. I remember like when I was bike racing, we were getting into that point where like the shoes were at first for a while were flexy and weren't very good. Carbon was like a relatively new material. This is like dating me for sure. And then I remember we went through this period of time where the shoes were getting so stiff that it was just like unbelievable. People would have huge foot problems, and like, I think it's just something where if you're putting your foot into a binding, you need to make sure that you're doing something at some point to unglue and to kind of like remedy some of the stiffness that you're putting in there. So we'll show you some foot rolling techniques in a second, and then working our way up the body back into our calves, hamstrings, and quads. Like those are like the big, powerful force producers that you guys are going to be using, right? And one of the biggest benefits of myofascial work, and like kind of like what we'll talk about when it comes to the horses too, is we're trying to do things that help our body get positive benefit without putting additional impact on it. And that's where I think myofascial release really shines, because what we're doing is we're playing with tissue tension and we're playing with blood flow. And those are two big things that exercise does on its own. So just the fact that like you're getting out and walking or you're riding your bike, that's increasing blood flow. That's a good thing, right? However, with that comes all of the additional things like the stress on your system. But when you're doing myofascial release, we're able to get some blood flow back into these areas, help them recover a little bit. And we're doing that in kind of a little bit more of a passive way. So we're actually putting just pressure onto an area. And then when we take the pressure off, the blood flows right back into it. There's also like some pretty interesting neurological things that are happening there too, because anytime we touch, like, I was just reading this great article. It was called "The Skin is a what is there? It was called "The Skin is a social organ," I think is what it was called. And it's this idea that like the skin has so many different levels to it and so many different purposes. Part of it is like protection. Part of it is like keeping your heat and your body temperature equalized. And then the other big part of it is that it's like this, the way they talk about it in this article is that it's like this party. There's all these different people that are part of it, all these different groups, and they all have different purposes. So you've got some parts of your skin that are holding on to sensory cells that are going to tell you just how much wind pressure there is. There's going to be another part of your skin that's telling you just what, like how the deep pressure in your body feels, or like what the sensations are they're getting when you feel vibration, or all these different things, right? Our bodies are like very, very tuned into our environment. And that's often because what we're getting is all of this input from the outside, and then we have to then make sense of it. And so myofascial release can be a really cool way to kind of reset some of those areas, or it can be a cool way to remind those areas that that there's stuff going on there. And so parts of our body that we don't necessarily always think of as like big prime movers can sometimes turn into those areas that become naggy injury areas, like the inner groin or like our outer hip. Areas where we think of those as like they're not necessarily the prime producers for a movement, but they're the assistance muscles. Make sense? Okay. So first thing we'll do, did everyone bring a little, I think I told Jasper, see if everyone could bring like a lacrosse ball or like a foam roller or anything like that. And if you do have it, follow along and we could do it together. And if not, then you guys can watch this video later or just remember some of it and then you can try it yourself. I always usually leave a lacrosse ball by my toothbrush, because that gives me two opportunities throughout the day where I look over and I see it and I'm like, oh, sweet, I'm brushing my teeth. I'll just put the ball on the ground and roll my feet out a little bit. So give me one sec. Good boy, buddy.
I'm just going to go grab mine.
Yeah. And so a lacrosse ball works well because it's circular. You don't have to use a lacrosse ball. You can literally use anything that's going to provide a little bit of feedback back into the foot. So I've had people take water bottles before, and you can use like a Nalgene bottle. You could take like an actual plastic water bottle, throw it in the freezer, and then it creates like this nice little cylinder. And you can get as fancy as you want with this. Golf balls work good too.
Take two golf balls and duct tape them together.
Yeah, and all we're doing is we're creating a little surface that we can then tuck underneath the bottom of our foot. And the way I like to think of it is the foot almost is like a triangle on the bottom. You've got three different arches. You've got your medial longitudinal arch, your lateral longitudinal arch, and then the transverse arch in the front, which is, if you look at my foot here, perfect example, we're talking triangle here, here, and here. And if you think of the heel of your foot and then the outside of the big toe and outside of the little toe as those three corners, I always like to tell people, I want you to stay within, a half an inch of all of those points. So you're not going to tuck a ton of pressure right onto the front part of your big toe. You're going to stay within that kind of like the meat of the triangle. And all we're going to do is use a little bit of our body weight. We don't have to smash the living daylights out of our bottom of our feet, but I like to start people off with the first 30 seconds or so where all they're doing is they're just doing exploration. And exploration looks like this. You take your foam block or whatever it is on the ground, and you put it between the bottom part of your foot, and you're putting about 5 to 10% of your body weight on it, and you're just rolling back and forth ever so slightly. And all we're doing here is we're doing a little opener upper for the joints. So like that pressure up pushes and expands my foot. It starts to like open up my metatarsals a little bit. And it starts to give me an idea as to what I'm feeling underneath the bottom of my foot. If I feel like a big hot spot or a spot that feels like pretty uncomfortable. It's just information for me to know. And then after about 20-30 seconds of doing that, I'm going to start by doing a few 20 to 30 second little myofascial pressure release points. And all that looks like is I settle on one spot, and then I'm going to put anywhere between 15 to 25% of my body weight into it. I'm going to pin it down, and then I'm going to take my toes and I'm going to splay them up. So now I'm pulling my toes up and away. I'm going to hold for about 3 to 5 seconds, and then I'm going to curl my toes all the way in. So now what I'm doing is I'm doing a pin and stretch. So I push down on one particular spot, and then instead of moving the ball around my whole foot, now I'm moving my whole foot around the ball. So if everyone gets a chance to try that, think about putting that pressure down, find one little spot, and then think about one toe at a time, splay them up, hold for a few seconds, and then curl them back down. And what you should notice is that as you extend and bring your toes up, what we're doing is we're lengthening, and we're putting tension into the plantar fascia. And the plantar fascia is a big strip of connective tissue that supports the foot and helps us with our gait cycle. But as we start to curl our toes back again, we actually slacken that plantar fascia, and we get pressure deep into some of those supporting muscles that are a little bit deeper into the foot. And those are the ones that are helping us with, like, the foot is just such a cool thing because we've got 26 different bones, and each one of them have small muscles and tendons and ligaments, some of them that don't even work until your foot is canted at like 20 degrees with your big toe up and like a little bit of eversion. It's like we've got pretty complicated feet. And I think one of the reasons why we have to actually do some stuff to make sure that each of those muscles gets a little bit of TLC once in a while is because we don't spend a lot of time on uneven surfaces. Like most of our day, we're basically on flat surfaces. And so this is a good opportunity for like us to check back in and for us to get some of those spots to actually see daylight for a little bit. And I think that we run into issues when we're not using our bodies the way that they were intended to. And so for a while, and I think actually right now too, there's a big barefoot running craze or like minimalist shoe craze. And like we were talking about earlier here is like, I think that's actually a great thing. I think people should spend some time in minimalist shoes or in bare feet or like, you know, with just their socks on at home or something, but they can't do it too quickly and they can't do it all the time. Because as much as it was a big thing back in the day where we used to, obviously we didn't have shoes, but we also didn't have things like concrete that we're walking on all the time. We were just walking on the forest floor, right? So it was a little bit softer for us and a little bit more manageable, but it also kind of played to our strengths, which was we had this really cool dexterous foot. So that's usually the first thing that I start people off with. And I usually recommend for a couple minutes. So 2 to 3 minutes each side. And that can be something, you don't have to do all of this stuff all at once. This could be little pieces that you pick apart through in your day. So you might even start your day getting out of bed and just doing a little bit of work with your feet. Like I said, put it by your toothbrush and it can help a lot.
Yeah, or I even sometimes tell patients, like a lot of people, you know, throw on Netflix after dinner or whatever. So we keep them by our couch so that we can roll out our feet while we watch TV or eat dinner even.
Yeah, we have like our little, our
I don't know if you can see. It's like
little
our
myofascial basket back there that has all of our different stuff in it.
Lives next to the couch.
Yeah, and it's like, it's a nice way to feel like a little, like you're doing a little something for your body during a period of time where you're also resting and recovering. And
then the easiest time to add a new habit in is to attach it to an existing habit. So that's why I say if you take medication, do it when you brush your teeth or eat or something that you do that you are guaranteed to do during the day. So it's like if it's a habit for you to eat dinner at a certain time or watch some TV at night or something, like just have, like Dan said, putting the lacrosse ball by your toothbrush just to piggyback the habit to add a new one in.
Yeah, like for me, for instance, my morning ritual is like I'll get up and the first thing I do is grind the coffee and warm up the bottom so that when it actually gets, like, I just do it naturally now. Even when I'm not having coffee in the morning, if I'm just having tea, I'll just like, oh, I find myself doing something. It's that association. And so doing a little something where already you've had like a good win. And I think there's also the reason why the foot is so important is I think because that's our biggest connection to the ground. And so that kind of sets the foundation for the whole day, right? Just being a little bit more familiar and a little bit more flexible in through your feet. even if you just go right out the door and you're off to work after that and you're not working out till the afternoon, it's just such a cool way to start your day. And then we also should probably just quickly cover a couple of things that, like, when we're doing myofascial release, there's really, I look at it as like two camps. One is you're looking at the prep phase. So this is prepping for exercise. And then there's like the post phase afterwards. And we look at it similar to how we would with stretching, right? With like a stretch that we're doing before exercise. We don't want to like pre-fatigue the muscle or beat it up too much so that it can't perform its task. We want to make sure that we're just doing stuff that's lightly getting that muscle ready, maybe doing the same things we talked about, which is like getting some blood flow there, making sure that our body's a little bit more aware of the joints. And then afterwards, we want to make sure that we're doing things that do the same kind of like helping steps, but maybe we're actually going to venture a little bit deeper, and we're going to get some of those secondary benefits, which are going to be things like muscle expansion, and even some small amounts of inflammation can be really helpful to kind of get the body to heal up a little bit quicker afterwards. So I always like to say that if you're doing myofascial work before exercise, you want to err on the side of being a little kinder to yourself and making sure that you're, doing things that are a little bit shorter in duration. So shorter stretches, shorter myofascial release. And then after your exercise, when we're in more recovery mode, that's when we want to do things like focus on nice, slow inhales and exhales, to think about like slowing down our nervous system and relaxing things a little bit and getting a little bit deeper in there and holding it for longer periods of time. So I always like to say that if you're foam rolling before, you don't want to do it for any more than about 30 seconds to maybe a minute or two. And again, it's like specific. So like your feet will be like closer to a couple minutes, but your calves might only be 30 seconds to a minute. And then when we're doing a little bit deeper stuff at the end, you can double, maybe even triple that if you really want to. But I wouldn't do 5 minutes of calf rolling right before I go out and run a 5K. I would just do something to just get the body ready for it and then start to hit it. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay. So the next thing we'll get into is using the foam roller. And did you just throw an emoji up in your corner? A little thumb up emoji?
Sweet.
Nice. I need to figure out how to do the poo emoji and throw it. So for our rolling, there's lots of different ways to actually, here, Alex, do you want to use the whiteboards? Yeah. So lots of different types of rollers. Some look worse than others with like spikes.
Torture device.
Yeah, and then we've got other ones. Think of it as like different tools. Like if you have, like you might have two different saws. One is like a hand saw, one is like a chainsaw, and they're just for different applications. But you can usually make do if you just need a saw, right? And so something like this is a little bit more, not as dense or not as prickly as something like this. So this could be really great used for like your thoracic spine or for your quads or something like that. You don't need as much pressure, versus something like this can be a little bit more specific for like your calves, or I mean, you can also use it for those other parts too. You just have to be a little bit more careful. And there's lots of ways of taking something like this and making it a little bit kinder. And I'll show you some of those. But we have, again, a couple different ways that we can kind of scan through the body with a foam roller, and then a few ways that we can actually get into some of those deeper spaces. So the first thing I always get people to do is to start by just, same thing we did with our foot, and just scan through part of their body with the roller. So you start off with the back of your calf, and we're going to start just above our sock line. We don't have to go all the way down to where our Achilles or where our heel cord is. Tendons don't necessarily like compression. In fact, tendons don't do very well with compression at all. That's usually why people get like Achilles issues and stuff and things like that, is because like their shoe is compressing on the back of their heel cord, but they really like stretch. So that's why things like heel drops work so well for people who have Achilles problems, but that's like a different topic. The main thing we want to do is we just want to make sure we're not smushing the daylights out of the back of our heel. We want to stay about 3, maybe 4 inches above, and focus on getting into the meat of the back of the calf. So from here, I just start off just above that sock line area, and I might use my foot for a little bit of help and my hands to kind of lift my body off the ground. And I'm just gonna roll back and forth. And as I roll back and forth, I'm gonna turn my heel in and out. And again, this is just me scanning through, right? Once I've done a couple scans, maybe I've done 20, 30 seconds like that, I'm gonna settle up on a point that's just at the base of that sock line. And I can use my other leg for a little bit of extra support here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my ankle to kind of tether and to pull on that muscle the same way I did with my foot. So I'm going to put my leg onto my other leg, and then I'm going to take my heel and I'm going to do some nice, small, slow circles. And as I bring my toe up and I dorsiflex my foot up, I'm tensioning my muscle. And as I point it, I'm relaxing it. So I'm working into different levels of muscle. Part of it is going to be things like my toe flexors. I'm going to get my gastroc. I'm going to get my soleus. And they're all going to come into tension at different levels. And you don't really need to worry about all that stuff. Right now, all you're worrying about is just this general release into the back of your calf. And so I like to say maybe like 5 or 6 circles in each direction, and then slide up your calf a little bit, get a little bit higher into the meat, and exact same thing. You're going to start to roll in and out with your ankle, point the toe, pull it back. And if you want to do some gas pedal and some brake, that's the same kind of idea. We're just not putting that rotation in the ankle, but you're pointing the toe and you're pulling it back. You work that all the way up until the back of the calf, and you want to stop again, probably about 3 to 4 inches away from the back of the knee, because you've got a lot of arteries and veins and nerves back here. We don't want to be spending a lot of time pressing super hard back into there. It's a little different if your therapist is going to do that for you. You just have to be a little bit more mindful of what's actually happening in that spot. Sound good so far? Sweet. You've thrown that emoji down again? Yeah. So think of this as, this is now the principles. So I've shown you how to do it in your foot, and I've shown you how to do it in the back of your calf. Like, the principles for other parts of the body are so similar to that. We're going to do the same thing into our quad. We're going to do the same thing into the outside of our hip, and the same thing to our inside of our hip. And so all we did was we started with a general scan. We were kind to ourselves and making sure that we were just kind of doing something to familiarize our body with that tissue. Like, when we start to move an area, our body becomes more familiar with it, which is like, if you've ever sat in the movies and your hand falls asleep, it just goes to show how much information we're receiving when we move. And that's, I think, the reason why people get addicted to exercise and people like feel so good when they move. Like, you know, you just say, oh, just get out the door, and you start moving and you're like, oh, I actually feel a lot better. It's because when your joints and when your skin and when your connective tissue is moving, we're getting more information up into the brain about that part of the body. So myofascial release is like a nice way to bring in blood flow and to get length in the connective tissue and everything. But it is also a way to just make your body more familiar with what's going on. So let's go into the back of the hamstrings a little bit. I like being a little bit higher up when I do something like this. So I'll either stack a book, or I'll even do this up on my couch. And so I'll just show you the little variation. You can tuck your roller on a chair. And again, you just roll yourself back and forth with the legs straight. And then once you've found those spots and we're ready to do our little movements with this too, I'm going to sit closer to the end of my couch, and then I'm going to bend and extend my knee. Bend and extend. And I might turn my heel in and out, and I might do 3 or 4 reps like that. Then I'm going to chalk up a little bit and get closer to my knee, and I'm going to work my way up and down the leg. And same idea for if I'm doing something like this on my stomach and I'm working out my quads. Come onto my stomach. Start off with my other knee for support, and I can do my little scan. So I'm rolling in through and out. I'm not putting a ton of pressure, like I'm not torturing myself right now. But then I'm going to set up at the base of my knee, just about an inch or so above the back of my knee, and then I'm going to start to bring my heel to my bum. Just hold for a second, and then I'm going to work my way down slowly, about an inch or so at a time, maybe 3 or 4 reps each direction, coming down a little bit more until I work my way all the way up to the front part of my quad. Again, we don't want to get too high up in here. There's other ways of kind of like working into our hip flexors and everything like that too. Then same thing for the inside of our leg too. If we get, this is actually where the thicker foam roller works really well. And I'll actually show you a little trick for making something like this a little thicker, especially if you're going to be using the inside of your, for the inside of your leg. What you do, I'm just going to show on light. So if you have a yoga mat as well, you just take your foam roller like this, and you roll the whole thing back up into your yoga mat. So not only does this give me a really similar feel to this foam roller, but they're also about the same width. You kind of see that? So I went from having like a really thin roller to now I've got a pretty thick one. And then if I'm going to use this on the inside of my leg, I lay down on my left side, and then I get into, use a little corgi pillow, at my inside leg, almost like I'm spooning the inside of the foam roller. And then bringing my hip back, I can roll in and out. So I'm kind of jutting my hip forward and bring it back. And then I grab onto the roller for support. I take my leg and I straighten it out and I pull it back. So again, I'm kind of tacking it down with the roller, and then I'm using muscle contraction to kind of pull the muscle over that pivot point. I work all the way up into the inside of my thigh. Again, if I want, I can do a little bit of a rotation in and out of my ankle to get a little more angles in some of those spots. But just working it up and through there, especially if I'm warming this up, you don't need to spend any more than about a minute on each inner thigh like that. So far, so good? Okay, sweet. The other area that I think is really important to talk about is foam rolling in through our thoracic spine and our middle back. The mid back is probably like the biggest bane of most endurance cyclists. It's just the worst because we're spending so much time being rounded forward. Like I bet you I've spent countless hours as a cyclist, just like after long rides, just like heaped over my foam roller. And it's just because it's such a taxing sport, because you have to be aerodynamic and you have to make sure that you're getting in a good position, especially if you're on the horns. Like if you're on tri-bars, you're just curling yourself up into a cashew, right? So making sure that you do a little something to work on getting extension back into your thoracic spine is just really super important. And so for that, the nice soft foam roller or the yoga mat foam roller is a good option. And what we do is start on our backs. And I always like to tell people that, actually, do you want to do this for me, Alex?
Sure.
I'll get Alex to demo this and I'll walk you through it. So the big thing we want to avoid, I guess, is we don't want to be putting too much pressure in through the space where our rib cage ends and our hips begin. So this part of my lower back right here is going to be off limits because the joints in my lower back change angle. And when they go from that area in your upper back, they're facing this direction. When they get into our lower back, they face this way. So when I really push through here, I could actually really injure and hurt my lower back. So I want to think about it as like bra line and above is all fair game. Everything lower bra line down to the hips, we're going to use something else for that. We're not going to use a foam roller. So Alex is going to start just at the base of her bra line. She's going to bend her knees. And what she's doing here is she wants to think each segment is getting the attention. It's not just her bending her back. So just bend your back all the way over the back. So she's not flaring her rib cage up like this. That's just pinching in through one or two specific spots, and it probably just doesn't feel all that great for her. What she's going to do here, she's going to use pressure into her hips and into her heels to pike herself up into a little bridge. And then one segment at a time, she's going to think about doing a small extension over top. There we go. And then she's going to come back up. Each segment of your spine only moves a few degrees, but we have a lot of them. So that adds up to a lot of range of motion. Right now, if she wants to even tuck her bum down, she can take her hands, squeeze them together like this, which is going to give her a little round of her back. And then she can think about her elbows making the movement, keeping her head nice and secure. She's going to roll back, hold ever so slightly for a second, and then pulse back up again. And so I like to think each segment or each spot that you're stopping on deserves at least 8 to 10 reps like this. So we're thinking we extend, we hold, we come back. We extend, we hold, and we come back. Yeah, and then we're bringing our hips up and down to match where we want that tension point to be. And then typically we're going to get to about a point right above the base of our, the angle of our shoulders, where we're going to then start to feel it more into the shoulders and less into the spine. And so we just want to make sure that we're sticking pretty much between the top rib position and the bottom rib position. Sound good? Excellent modeling. You did such a great job. So does that make sense for everybody? The reason why we don't go down super low is because we're compressing a little bit more than we want to. And the reason why we don't go up until the back of the neck is you're not going to really get much benefit out of it. It's going to act more like a pillow than anything else. And we don't want to really lever super hard over our neck.
Do you want to talk about the shapes of the spine, the curves?
Yeah, Alex is going to talk about some of the curves in there
And
too.
the reason why that is because there's 3 curves to your spine. Can I borrow your spine?
Yes.
Yeah. And so the mid-back here is what makes this rounded shape, and it already is like that. And then you can see his neck here makes this backwards curve where it slopes forward, and then the low back also slopes forward. We call that a lordosis, and this is a lordosis. This part's a kyphosis. So if you press into a lordosis, it would be like this part that wants to just do this, and we can do this already, and we can arch our backs. Like, we know that we can do that. And we know that we can round forward from here because those are the parts of the spine that already do those motions naturally. It's not as therapeutic if you're doing that because you're already doing something that you can do. So that's why foam rolling from here to here is good, because you're aiding yourself in a motion that doesn't naturally want to move that direction. So you're creating like that lordosis in a kyphotic section of the spine.
Yeah, or you could think of it as like you're if you were to look at the body as like a spring, so like from the side, you've got your little angles that look like this, and a spring is going to give you the ability to kind of absorb shock and everything. There's more to it than that, but just the fact that we're able to push down, the more that we push and compress, the bigger those curves are going to start to get. And there's, like I said, it's not just about the curves here, but there's also, we want to make sure that our body has the flexibility to do as much of both of those movements as we can. So we don't want our upper back to just be amazing at doing this and super terrible at doing that. We want to be as even as symmetrical or as close to symmetrical as we can.
And same thing with the low back and the neck, right? Like, it's one thing if you can just do this, but if this is all you've got going forward, you should train that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, just congruency.
One other thing too, I'm just gonna show you guys something else. It doesn't require a foam roller or anything like that, but it's also a great tie-in exercise. This is like the Swiss Army knife exercise. I think that I give most people when they don't have any equipment, or just as like, it's just like a money exercise. And it's called open book exercise, or it's called the rib grab exercise, depending on where you went to school or what you do. And we'll kind of like end the myofascial release part with this because we want to have a little time left for questions and stuff. But I'll show you and get Alex to demo it. Do you want to lay on your side? And Alex is going to face away. She's going to face the couch. Yeah. And so she's got the foam roller for her pillow. She's going to bend her knees up to 90 degrees. Can you guys, let me just make sure you guys can see this all right. You know what, why don't you flip the other way? Okay. Yeah. So make a little bit more sense. So Alex is bent with 90 degrees in her hips, and her arms are going to be out straight. And the important thing in here is that she stacks up her hips over one another and her shoulders over one another. Because if her hips are like this, or if her shoulders are like that, she's not going to get the same effect out of this. And she's going to really make sure she's not quite at 90, so she's going to come up a little bit more. So she's got something for her head to relax on. She's going to take her top hand and she's going to bring it over here and grab onto the top of her rib cage, and she's going to use her fingers to make a contact point here. And then what she's really going to focus on doing is making sure that her hips and her knees stay stacked over each other. So I want them to continually touch. So if I have something like a book or a yoga strap, I can say, hey, pinch that between your knees. And then what I want you to do is, using your breath, taking a nice big deep breath in, exhale and pull your rib cage over to the floor. So what she's getting is she's getting a nice rotation and a nice extension into her middle upper back. And she's also getting expansion into her lungs and into her ribs. And so the reason why we're so stiff often in our mid backs is because we also have our rib cage there. That's our protection, right? So the more joints we have there, the stiffer it's going to be and the harder it's going to be for it to move. But when I'm using my hand and leveraging and exhaling, I get this nice relaxation effect with my breath. And I also get this nice expansion into an area that's usually pretty stiff. That makes sense? So give that a try. That's if there are 2 exercises you take from this whole little tutorial, do the foot foam rolling or the ball rolling thing, and do this exercise, because this really catches a lot of stuff. this opens up your shoulder, it opens up your mid back and your neck, and it opens up your rib cage. And one last thing that we'll talk about is this idea of breath being a part of what you're doing in myofascial release. If you're holding your breath, or if you're hyperventilating, or if you're beating yourself up so hard, you're just, and you're really, really going a little too far, breath is the closest thing we have to direct communication with our nervous system. And so we've got two sides of it. We've got our parasympathetic nervous system, which is like our rest and digest, which is the more like relaxation side of our nervous system. And then on the other side, we've got our sympathetic, which is going to be the one that it's our fight or flight. It's like our engine revs up. And even though we call them different things, they're all part of the same nervous system. And it's like a motor. And that internal motor can go up and it can go down. And when we're doing myofascial release, we don't want our motor to be up high rev. We actually want it to be down and relaxed, which is going to give us that like nice expansion into our connective tissue. Otherwise, we're going to resist stuff. So think about that when you're doing this as well. If you can take your breath and start to slow it down, and particularly by breathing in through the nose and out through the nose, start with something very simple like 4 breaths or 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, and maybe a nice little suspension in between. So it's like 4 seconds in, couple seconds, 4 seconds out, couple seconds. It's a good starting point to be doing all that stuff. So hopefully that that gives you guys some stuff to work on and gives you a few things. It's kind of a hard thing to fit into just an hour, but hopefully there's some nuggets in there for you guys too. And then we'll take the next couple minutes for a couple questions too. Oh, did we just freeze?
I'll jump in there.
Oh yeah.
You're frozen.
Oh yeah, that's better.
Okay, are you? Oh, you're unfrozen now.
Good, we can hear you.
Oh, now you're.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Oh, no.
I can hear. It's okay.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I think we're having a little patchy internet just for a sec.
that's okay.
That's okay. It happens.
Yeah, we can hear everybody.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. You both froze in an amazing position.
Yeah.
So my question is, like you said, I carry a lot of tension in my back, my low back. Like I find that's where I hold all my fatigue. I don't know why. I'm a dad.
Oh
I
yeah.
guess that's, my kids make my back tired. I don't know if that's a thing. I'm just making that up.
Oh sure.
But
Yeah.
I use my foam roller a lot on my low back, but I just want to make sure I understood, like you said, not to go down there with the foam roller, but maybe that was just on your spine. But I find like it's the musculature on either side of the spine that I like, if I dig in there a little bit, it just feels like heaven. Like I feel so much better after, but I want to make sure I'm not like doing something wrong if I'm digging around in there.
Sure. I always think of it as like if you're building a birdhouse, you probably want to use the right tools. You don't want to just use like you don't want to use like a file to hammer your nails in. You want to use like a nail. So like in that part of your spine, the best thing to use, and usually, I mean, like again, I haven't been able to like see what it's like or taken a history from you or anything like that. But it sounds like what you're getting is you're getting some muscular fatigue issues. And so back pain is not just like this, you know, I have back pain, you have back pain, it's the same. There's so many different things that lead into it. It could be previous injury, it could be compensations, it could be what you're doing around the house, it could be exercise routines. It's like lots of different things add into that. And, but often what happens is people will get some relief from some of the muscular component of back pain by doing myofascial release on things like your QL and some of your rectors on the side. So like the best way to get into there, instead of using something that's going to compress both, like think about it like this, you're compressing all through here in order to get to the meat, which is actually on the side. You'd be better off using like a lacrosse ball like this, taking it and tucking it right onto the side of where that muscle is and doing something like this. You lay on your back. So if I'm gonna work my left side, I'm going to take my lacrosse ball into my left space right between my rib cage and my hip. And then I'm going to straighten my right leg and bend my left knee. And my left knee bending is going to push my lower back down into the ground, which is going to meet that resistance of the lacrosse ball. And from there, I can do things like take my arm up overhead to get a little bit more tension. I could do the same breathing patterns where I'm going to think nice and slow in through my nose and nice and slow out through my nose. And I'm focusing more on creating that tension in those muscles and less just right through the spine. So it's like, think about it as you're doing one side at a time versus pushing them both up together. And like the other thing, and this is, again, not to take this down a rabbit hole, when we do things like myofascial release, or when we're doing things like exercise, we get lots of different effects. We get general effects and we get specific effects. Just like training is going to give you general and specific effects, right? One of the things that we're doing, we're compressing muscles. Compressing muscles usually feels good, but we're also compressing joints. And joints don't necessarily start to feel bad until all of a sudden they start to feel bad. You know, like we don't get a ton of instantaneous feedback into every part of our body. So tendons and ligaments and things like that, I'm sure everyone has probably had an issue. Well, if you've run long enough, there's that old saying, it's like there's injured runners and there's runners that haven't run enough, or I don't know how it goes, but it's like everybody is going to eventually get a ache or pain somewhere in their calf or their foot or their hamstring or something. And it usually just comes up like this. And that's because we communicate better through our muscles than we can communicate through our tendons and ligaments and things like that. And so when we push in through there with a lacrosse ball or with a foam roller, we're smushing all of that stuff together. And on top of that, we're smushing our blood supply, we're smushing some of our nerves, we're pressing a bunch of things together. So think of that as that's that big general effect. And what you're feeling is that specific effect. So does that kind of make a little sense without getting too down the neuro rabbit hole?
I just want to ask, when you do the foam roller on your low back, are you like laying straight back onto it, or are you kind of rolling onto each side to get into the side of the muscle?
Yeah, definitely going each side, because it actually doesn't feel good if it's on my spine down there.
Sure.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of, and it's not, I don't have a back injury. I don't feel like that. It's just like, that's where, like, of all the places on my body that feel really tired sometimes, it's the musculature on either side of my spine and my low back.
Yeah.
And so when I, if I work them out, and I do use a lacrosse ball sometimes, but it mostly is like a foam roller, and it feels really good. But you're right. If I put the foam roller right down the middle, it doesn't feel good at all. Like I kind of go to the side of it. I just want to make sure I wasn't doing it.
And that's a good differentiation, because like some people take that no pain, no gain approach, and they're like, oh, this doesn't feel comfortable, but it must be good because I'm foam rolling it. And then they end up doing more harm than good. But it's a good point. And like the other thing too is like everybody's body is slightly different. Like some people could lay on the foam roll. Like there's probably a few people that could lay on the foam roller in their lower back and they'd be okay. And some people that just look at it that way and their back would start to hurt. And so that's the thing, like we're all our own unique little snowflake. So we all have to do a little bit of self-experimenting to figure out what stuff is going to work best for us, right? So all the stuff we reviewed today, these are suggestions to try, and don't take any of it for dogma. Like don't think of it as like, this is the way it has to be done. These are just the rationales that Alix and I have kind of come up with to be doing this for the last little bit, and just some of the things that we've kind of learned from our own self-experimentation.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries at all. And there's great questions too. You want to talk about the horse?
Well, let's see if anybody else has a question. I think Kelly might.
Yeah, I have a question. So, very stupidly, I separated my shoulder on Christmas Day, and I've like rehabbed it. So I have like good like range and stuff with it, but it is still like right on the tip. It is so painful still, like to touch, or if I like roll on it at night, it like wakes me up. Like it's April. Like, is it just need more time, or what's your experience with, like, I'm not really sure. And it still drives me nuts. And so, yeah, anyway, I was just wondering what your thought was.
No, and like I said too, everyone is very different. It's really important to rehab it. What degree of separation was it?
Second. So
okay.
Like pretty minor, but
yeah, but still enough to damage. And like, so we grade them like
1 to 6. Yeah, I'm an emergency room physician, so.
Oh, okay, there you go.
I know, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, so I had a grade 2, but like it still hurts, and I just sort of expected that it would be not sore still.
So part of what I do in practice is I look at the best way of, when we rehabbing is guiding tissue healing.
Okay.
Rehab is teaching a person what they can do at that moment to better their situation in the future.
Mhm.
And Alex and I are both movement-based chiropractors. So like a lot of what we do, we get mistaken for physical therapists all the time, because a lot of what we're doing is we're making sure that the active component is just as important as like the passive component that we do for people. And anytime you have an injury where you've damaged connective tissue takes up to 90 days to fully repropagate.
Mhm.
And once it's there, think of it as like you're just getting the materials delivered to the job site.
Okay.
After that, the rehab process, I think we actually end up cutting it a lot shorter, because we stop when we stop feeling pain or we stop feeling stiffness. But really what we need to do is we need to continuously stress that new tendon or ligament or muscle or joint in the way that we want to promote movement. And so it's kind of hard for me, because I see that you can move it around and it looks okay like that too. A lot of it is going to be the small little nuance things. And also everyone's body is a little bit different.
Okay.
So I usually say that if you're working on it every day and you're doing a little something for that shoulder every day and it's still bothering you, then it might be a pain sensitivity issue.
Okay.
But if you've just kind of like left it for the last little bit, you're like, oh, I think my shoulder's good.
Yeah, I stopped doing my exercises. I'm not gonna lie.
And you know what though? I only
stopped like when the range got good, and then it like stayed maintained like after I stopped, but then I just sort of thought the pain would go away and it didn't.
Oh yeah. And tendons and if you think about it like this, when you separate a shoulder, now all of a sudden you've increased range of motion, because tendons and ligaments and things like that are part of their job are range limiters. And they give us information, right? Like tendons and ligaments, when they stretch, they feed into a part of our brain that lets our body know to fire muscles. That's actually one of the cool things about it. That's why, like, if you were to take your foot and just cant it out and stand on the outside of your foot, you don't roll your ankle. It's because the body intuitively knows to switch these muscles on, right? Mm-hmm. But when we start to tear ligaments and tendons, we're actually now tinkering with some of the neurology. We're tinkering with some of the ways that our body sends signals. And so it's actually even more important to train that stuff when you're pain-free, because pain is also a big signal that changes muscle firing. So it's kind of layered. There's a lot more stuff that's happening. But I would say the biggest thing you could do is revisit some of those exercises that were helping you, mm-hmm. and then start to think of it as you can train your body in a way that's pain-free. That's all, like, because eventually that's what we want to get, right? Be like you feel like you've got your range of motion back, but you want to start getting some of that pain gone. So train it in those pain-free ranges of motion first and foremost, mm-hmm. and then start to venture out into some of those other ranges of motion. Okay. But that could be something like that might now all of a sudden limit you from a few activities. And the problem is no one likes to be told, like, hey, don't do pull-ups right now, or don't do this. It's like, but I want to. It's like, you can think about it as like, pace yourself, like make sure that you can actually take care of that pain symptom first, so that it doesn't just become this chronic injury that's now going to bother you for like seasons upon seasons upon seasons.
Yeah. Like I haven't been in the water at all, and now we like kind of can't, and hopefully it'll get warm in the next couple of weeks and be able to go outside. But yeah, I haven't really like swam on it since I heard it. And so I honestly am like, I don't know, because I sort of was like, well, the range is good, but then I'm like, so do I get in the water and like try to swim? Like, I don't really know what to do. So yeah.
Well, you know what? So I'll tell you that one of the easy things to start off with, mm-hmm. think about how many positions your shoulder needs to be in for a good swimming stroke. Yeah. So you need like all the basic fundamental ranges of motion, which is like external rotation, internal rotation, abduction, and then you actually need adduction too, and flexion, all these different ranges, and extension of your shoulder.
All of them.
So you need all of them, like yeah. And so what I would do is I would start looking at your shoulder and try and break down each range of motion and see which ones could use the most improvement, mm-hmm. because it's not always tendons and ligaments that hold you back from range of motion. Often what it is it's muscles that are supporting when there's a lack of support from the ligaments. I know that sounds like a lot, but like, I'll give you an example. Lay on your back, roll over to your side, and check to see how much internal and external rotation you have on that side.
Right. Okay.
Then compare it to the other side and see what it feels like. And we can always improve our active range of motion compared to our passive range of motion, because I can always only get up to here, but Alix can push my arm back and I can get a little bit more passive range of motion than I have.
Yeah.
And so we want to think about bridging that gap, the space between. So if my active range of motion is here and my passive range of motion is here, I want it to be pretty tight. I don't want it to be like, this is my active range of motion, this is my passive range of motion. That means that as soon as I enter in through there, that is basically the highway for injury. Because if I can't control that range of motion that I have, then I'm flirting with injury every time I go there.
Okay.
So that's what I would start off with. And that's kind of what we do in clinic too, is we assess range of motion and we say, is this going to be a problem, or is this something do we want to give this person exercises to kind of tighten that gap, or are they good and our work is better spent somewhere else? But I am a big believer that like pain needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, because this is coming from a biker who raced like almost 2 full seasons. Like every pedal stroke I had like sharp stabbing knee pain on my left knee. And it was like, it got to the point where like, yeah, I know it sounds so stupid to say that, but like I was in that mindset of like, oh, it'll just go away. I'm fine. After about 10K, it would numb out and I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm all right now. But like, it definitely took its toll on my body. And like, now I've got like a calcified patellar tendon that is like, it's going to be a problem down the line. So it's when you start to like, it's almost like when you or when your tire starts to lose air and you're driving on that rim, eventually you're going to start to do some damage on that. So you want to make sure that like you're taking care of those things before they become an issue.
Cool. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. That was a great one though.
We've got a question here from Chris is going to jump in.
Hey guys, hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, definitely.
The only part that I had to look away for during your talk today was one that was most important to me. So I just wanted to make sure I understood the hamstring. So I have hamstring issues, and I saw you sit on the couch, and I just wanted to make sure that I understood how the movement of your leg after you do the exploratory piece there. I wanted to make sure I totally understood how to move the leg, if you know what I mean.
And so I think what I was saying is that you can do it the same way you would the quad, but because your knee is bending backwards, the best thing to do is to bring your hips up a little bit. So you can elevate it on a couch or a chair. I'll show you on this chair because it'll be a little closer to the screen. Can you see that a little bit better?
Yeah, that's great.
So I can put the foam roller right at the end of the chair, and I can angle it to whatever is going to suit my needs, because the last thing I want to do is be foam rolling like this and like be all bent over and be like strain my back while I'm doing something that's supposed to be good for my body, right? So I move my environment around me. I get myself over the straddle position like that, and you see how now I can turn my leg in and out?
Right.
So I've got 3 degrees of range of motion that I can play with. I can play with how high up my knee is. So I can be up here, or I can be here. And then I can turn my leg in and out. And then I can flex and extend my knee. So I'm just pulling it through there. And then as I work through a little bit more, bring it up. The big thing I don't want to be doing is finding myself like rounding through my back while I do this. Because that's actually... this is an orthopedic test in my line of work. You straighten your leg around your back and bring your chin to your chest. We're like actually tugging on more than just the muscle. We're actually tensioning all the nerve roots that are in the back. So the best thing to think about when you do that is to make sure your chest is nice and tall and your head's looking up.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
And like I said, experiment with it and play around with it. Cool. Thanks for the question, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks.
Anybody else? Any other comments or questions or anything? Anything you guys want some more clarification on, or anything you thought was particularly useful or helpful or anything?
I thought it was great. I picked up some really interesting little tidbits that I liked.
Sweet. Cool. I hope you did.
When you're exercising, that you get more feedback from your body. That was just an interesting concept I've never thought about before, but it sounds really cool. I like that idea.
Oh, it's like a fundamental neurological principle, is this idea that like the more like, so every single all of your joints, we have these, like, they're called afferent and afferent signals, right? So an afferent signal is coming into the body, an efferent signal is something that we send out of the body. And we get most of our afferent information, the stuff that comes in, through receptors that are in our joints. And so when your joints move well, it's just like your body is like a big computer that's constantly running diagnostics. So you actually learn more about your body the more you move it, and especially the more you move it in different ways. And that's why, like, they've done studies where they've gotten people and they've like artificially put their hands asleep, like the same way you would in a movie theater. And then they ask them to do like a touch pointing agility drill, and they don't do nearly as well because the part of our brain that coordinates that movement in our cerebellum doesn't get the input that it needs to make good decisions. So like you actually make better decisions when you move better. That's why Harvard did a study where they were looking at outcomes in people's jobs relative to how much they exercised. So, CEOs and executives who worked out at least a minimum of like 45 minutes a day were higher producers and better at their job, and had all these higher, it looked better and better and better when people were exercising. And part of that is the fact that they were more familiar with what they were doing. It's pretty cool. Like bodies, like that, we're fortunate that in our line of work, we just like work with cool stuff all the time. But any other questions or anything like that? I feel like we could talk about this all day. That's the problem. I feel like I need to like get the cane and like pull ourselves off screen.
I think that was great. Thank you so much for jumping in. And I got a lot from that. Like I have foam rollers and lacrosse balls lying around my house, and I kind of do it, but I never really know what I'm doing. So I found that very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. And you know what? It's always like self-experimentation is always going to be the best. So it's good. Hopefully you guys can try a few of those things out and see if they work for you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot for having us.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my thoughts on the horse thing real quick. Okay. Because I don't want it to be a cliffhanger.
If people have to go, like if they have stuff to do, you can watch it after. As I said, I don't want to tie people into this, but I'm fascinated if you're willing to tell me about it.
Okay, I'm going to give my theory, and then Alex can correct me on this. Okay. I think that workload is relative to the stress that happens from it. So like, it's the same thing with me. If I go out and I train and I'm doing barbell work, or if I'm doing kettlebell work, I have to do less of that than if I'm doing bodyweight work. And that's just because that the load on my body is higher when I load my body up with something. So like a horse who has a person riding it, who's like actually making impact on the ground, I feel like they can only do that so much. Otherwise they risk injury more.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's not wrong. It's I guess the first thing I should probably clarify is that I do English riding. So like there's English and then there's Western. So in English, in the English like discipline of riding, there's 3 main disciplines. There's dressage, which I did for almost 20 years. That's like the flat work. Sometimes people refer to it as horse dancing. That's the one where you generally look like you're sitting pretty and the horse is doing all the work. So I got to hear that accusation all the time. And then there's stadium jumping, which a lot of people also see. It's one of the more exciting ones. Horses are jumping very, very high, like up to 6 feet and over. And that, again, goes up to the Olympic level. And then something sort of like a combination of the two is called 3-day eventing. And that's a 3-day event every single time you show. The first day is dressage, which is the first one. The second day is what's called cross country, which is jumping out in a field. It's a combination of like an endurance race and like a huge bravery exercise for the horse. That's very, very hard on the horse. That's where all of the crazy accidents and injuries happen. And then day 3 is stadium jumping. And so it's a lower level of the dressage and the jumping. So you're not jumping as high and you're not doing as intricate movements in the dressage, but because you're doing them over 3 days, it's probably similar to like a triathlon for a horse. But it's spread out over 3 days.
Multi-stage.
Yeah, it's like a multi-stage thing.
It's insane. They wear like, so when they do the cross country stuff,
you're
they're
wearing a Kevlar vest with built-in airbags.
It looks
and
so crazy.
And all of your medical information is strapped into a waterproof sleeve on your arm in case you go down on the field. Like, that's how Christopher Reeve ended up paralyzed, was that sport. Anyway,
it's like so gnarly, like so hardcore.
Yeah, and even in like I did the one that was considered safe, right? It's like the flat exercise, but you're still working with extremely strong animals who all they have to do is decide that they don't want to be working with you anymore, and you're done, right? Like, it's yeah. So it depends on the type of load that you're doing on a horse. So I did the dressage, which was more lower impact, but way more load on the horse's muscles. So it'd be more strength exercise. So even it would be like comparing a bodybuilder to like an endurance athlete. And even though the horse isn't lifting weights, it's using its own body weight to carry itself through these intricate movements, versus a jumping horse is doing like speed and then also these really explosive movements and then coming back from that and maintaining like a good speed. So I can watch a horse move around and have a pretty good idea of the way it's trained and what it usually does, just based off of not only the way that it carries itself, but also like the musculature and the way that everything's been developed. And so the training programs vary from discipline to discipline. So the ones with jumping involved, so that would be 3-day eventing or just like stadium jumping, they have a bit more recovery time in them because that is quite a bit harder on the joints than dressage. Dressage does have quite a bit more, also have quite a bit of injuries associated with it. So when you say like, oh, do the horses get a week off? Generally, if you don't want to give them a lot of time off because you're working with an animal, you can't say, hey, you need to take a week off because it's actually good for you. They don't know that. Like, think about how hard it is we were just talking about how hard it is to get people to take their week off, and they know that it's good for them. Right? Like a horse, you can't really, there's not that same communication. So you have to almost trick them into relaxing by making them tired enough to relax.
You know what though? I bet you none of us would need a rest week either if we did our activity and then just chilled in a barn.
Yeah.
And ate
snacks.
Like, ate snacks. And like, I feel like.
And hung out with your friends all
day. Yeah, hung out with your friends.
Yeah,
like so, that pro life where you're just like coffees, single origin coffees.
So like their work day is like 1 to 3 hours a day, right? So like they're really only on the clock for a few hours a day. And so that's why a lot of them will start to go a little bit crazy if like you dread having an injury to a horse. One, the obvious, like you don't want that to happen. And two, because the horse is now suddenly a very, very big liability to deal with because now they have all this pent up energy that they're not used to releasing throughout the day. And sometimes they're put on stall rest. So it would be the equivalent of putting you in your closet and not telling you why. And you only get to go for a guided walk for 15 minutes a day. So it's a pretty loaded question, but Dan did sum it up pretty well where it's like there's also the horse is doing quite a bit more work than the rider. Like I'm doing a lot of work, but I'm also 1/10 the size of the horse. So by like comparison of the amount of exertion, the horse is doing quite a bit more, and they're the athlete in this. And like I said, we're kind of just trying to keep up and be in the best shape that we can. Horseback riders do not care about themselves or their bodies. They will put all of their money and all their attention, all their focus into the horse because that's the thing you paid for. That's the reason like you can't do your sport without it. And that's sort of like the way the whole mindset is set up. I'm not saying it's healthy or good. I'm just saying that that's sort of the way it is. It's known across the whole deal that horseback riders will put all kinds of money into their sport and nothing into themselves. So like so self-care is not really a thing.
I have this, I just got this great idea now.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine like the stationary bike equivalent to equestrian. You don't have to feed it. You just get on that thing. Basically, it's like a mechanical bull.
They have riding simulators, but I've never seen one in person. I don't know if I'd want to.
Yeah. It is cool though. I mean, there's so many things that have like as having an endurance background myself, so many things that have paralleled the training philosophies and stuff in what Alix does and what I did and what I kind of still do a little bit now. But it's so interesting. There's so many differences, but so many similarities.
There's also the bit of what's called sport specific training, where in order to get good at something, you do it more. So like cyclists cycle for a long time. There's not necessarily this concept of cross training as much in horseback riding as there should be. Some of like the really, really high elite riders, like the Olympians, they have personal trainers and physical therapists that they travel with, but that's like very, very high level. That's not like me when I was in high school, right? Like my parents would drop me off at the barn in summers when they were on their way out to work, and then they'd pick me up when they were done, and I'd been riding all day, because you're just like asking for horses to ride. There's not like a little space with a gym where I can do my ride and then do a bit of cross training afterwards. It's like the way for me to get better was to ride all day long. Yeah. And so like,
Crazy.
even though the horse gets their maximum amount in like an hour or two, I could still keep going. Doesn't matter if it hurts, right? Like you get more respect and more opportunities from pushing yourself harder.
Just
Not saying it's healthy. I'm not saying that's a good thing.
it just reminds me of like my days of like 6.5 hour rides, coming home, have a salad, have a nap, then have a coffee when you wake up. It's like I think that in all sports we do some things that are maybe a little outside of that healthy window. But we do it because
it was also a long time ago. Coaches don't know now coaches didn't know then what they know now. Like I competed in a national show, and my shoulder dislocated in the warm-up, and I went on and did the dang ride, and I didn't even think to tell my coach that my shoulder hurt until like days later, and I accidentally relocated it myself when I was.
We just had a shoulder dislocation question. You should have stepped in there.
We didn't have a shoulder. It was a separation.
A separation. Sorry.
It's a different thing. But
a shoulder.
But yeah, anyway,
thing.
I ended up having to have surgery on it. But it's like, I never would have thought to go up to my coach and say, it hurts, I can't ride. Like, it just didn't even, you ride.
We know better now.
We know much better now.
So that was a great question, Jasper. Very, very long answer to a very great question.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you. I am I'm fascinated just by that physiology and training methods have crossover. Like we're all just animals essentially. So yeah. This has been awesome. Thank you very, very much. Super grateful for you to make the time. And this has been awesome.
Thanks so much for having us. It was great to do that. Great to get up early. Hey, was that a wave for a question? Oh,
no.
I'm just showing my face to say like I was paying attention.
Oh, it's good to see you.
Hi, thanks.
Thanks for all the great questions, and thanks for having us on. It's always a blast to talk about this. So thanks, guys.
You bet. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Cool.
so much, crew.
Till next time.
Yes.